Hello, welcome back to another episode of Making Better Bites. Your host, Adrienne, here. And as you can see, if you're watching us on YouTube, I am joined by a guest. Her name is Carolyn. And I have actually had Carolyn on for one other episode before, and she is very knowledgeable about period wellness and really works in trying to destigmatize having a period and what all of that means and make the information more accessible to other people, which I really love. So thank you, Carolyn, for coming on today for an episode.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Perfect. So I really like your conversation on your page about destigmatizing the period and how everyone finds it. There's always, in the beginning, it seems like really embarrassing. And even into adulthood, I feel like having a period, many people find embarrassing, including myself, until the last couple years. So how did you find that for yourself, like destigmatizing and breaking that, like in your own personal life?
I think I'm still doing it. I'm still working on not having shame about my period. For personally, quite a few ways that I've worked on to just kind of like shed a lot of the shame and stigma and embarrassment about having a menstrual cycle. One thing off the bat that's very helpful, and this is kind of borrowed from a quote I read once that said, like, whenever you feel bad about yourself, or like your appearance was kind of like the main gist of the quote, like, whenever you feel bad about how you look, just know that someone is profiting off of that. And that quote kind of has stuck in my brain. It's been helpful if I am kind of going down a spiral about how I look or something like that. And I kind of use the same idea for my period and for the cycle in general, like just remembering that any shame or embarrassment I feel about the cycle is not natural. It's purposely put onto us to make us feel bad about our bodies, about who we are, to make us small, to make us easier to control as women and as people who menstruate, who are have differences than the people who have the most power. And so a lot of that's kind of the general lens I try to remember or the framework I try to use when I am feeling shame or embarrassment about talking about my cycle. And practices I use that have been really helpful are journaling. I'm a big journaler. I know it's not for everybody, but I have been journaling since I was 13. And then when I was like 20, I actually started journaling, or 22, I started journaling like actually my feelings, like my real feelings, not just like, oh, I don't want to reread this and think I'm dumb when I'm older. So anyway, but journaling has been a huge part of it. So just like talking about my cycle in my journal, getting that out, and then also going back to when my period first began. And I felt so much embarrassment and so much shame about having my period at first. I was 11 when I first got my period. And both my mom and my sister, I only have one sister, they were both out of town the weekend that I got my period. And I was 11 and I already felt really young. I felt like weird about it anyway. But it just kind of like led me down this rabbit hole of feeling super weird about my period till I was like 25. And I did a lot of work where I would talk to my younger self, just like kind of basic inner child work, but the focus on menstruation and my period and my cycle. And like I did this practice, and I was working with a therapist at the time, and I did bring up that I was working on my cycle and trying to feel less shame about it, which kind of just came up out of the blue. I wasn't really planning on talking to my therapist about it, but I did, and it was actually really helpful because I did a practice. I think it was with her, or it was on my own, but it was probably inspired by my work with my therapist, where I sat with my 11-year-old self, who was just like on the bed. Like I just imagined I was 25 sitting next to my 11-year-old self and just like telling her like, it's okay. It's actually nothing to be ashamed about. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's actually an extremely powerful gift to have. And so journaling and inner child work is kind of how I started to uncover like the shame and address like where I felt it was coming from, which was just, I think, growing up in a society that doesn't value women and doesn't value people who menstruate. And then from there, I just started talking about it more. I'm a big external processor. So I love to talk about things with anyone who will listen to me. And I just started talking about it with friends. And then I started holding groups where we would come together and talk about our periods. And hearing other people talk about their experience with their first period and just their experience with the feelings you get about menstruation living in our society really helped kind of like a collective heal during some group process, like group gatherings, because it was like we all shared very similar stories of feeling very shameful. And then we were all kind of like, what the hell? Why do we all feel this way? Like, that's ridiculous. So that was super helpful. So just kind of like wrap it up, like journaling, so like kind of like interpersonal work, journaling and inner child healing, and then also group work where like we're talking about it. And then I try really hard to talk about my cycle in a very neutral way in group settings, and I still struggle. Like sometimes my period wellness posts are linked to my personal Facebook, and like I still get a little like, like, do I want this on my personal Facebook? And sometimes it's just kind of like a business/personal thing. Like I don't really use my Facebook very often anyway, so I don't really like know how to handle that. But I'm also like, why am I embarrassed about this? So that's why I say it's still an ongoing thing for me of like, it's easy to talk about in a context where people are following me to talk about my period. But if you're just like my uncle on Facebook, do I want you hearing about it? But then I'm like, why? So yeah, it's kind of like a work in progress. And, you know, it's not a conversation that you want to have everywhere, every day, but it is just like a neutral topic that has had so much shame thrown onto it for literally no reason other than to make us feel bad about ourselves.
I love that. That just took me through such a roller coaster of emotions, because your first point of that, like someone is profiting off of us feeling bad about ourselves, like, and then the work you did to get through it. And much better than the way that I began feeling more comfortable about myself is just because I was like thrown into it and didn't have a choice, because I had so many problems and just like doctor's appointments and like transvaginal ultrasounds and like all of these different things where it's like suddenly I just had to become comfortable talking about it, and like had to relay the information to my family, like communicating with my dad and with my mom and my sisters and like my husband, just getting more comfortable talking about it because I didn't have a choice, because I had to talk about my health. And it's like, wait a minute, like if I had anything wrong with any other part of my body, like nobody would find this strange. If I was having surgery on my arm, nobody would find this strange. But it's like, well, my surgery is for endometriosis, like it's on my uterus, like things like that. It just becomes weird. It's like, why? It's just another, you know, all of those things. So like that's kind of how I got comfortable with it. But I agree about like the time and place as well, because yeah, on my public Facebook page, I don't think I would be as comfortable putting that out there. And also to your point about first period stories, that is so funny that so many people resonated, because I was thinking the exact same thing. I'm like, literally same thing happened to me. I was at camp when I was 11 years old, and that's when it first started. And then when I got home, my mom was out of town. I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck do I do? This is so embarrassing. Who am I going to tell? And I don't even really understand what's happening. So that's so funny that so many people just like relate to that experience as well.
Yeah, I would love to get to a point where I don't feel a cringe if I'm posting something, especially like I write a lot of like, I don't know, I guess you would call it prose, like not really poetry, but I just write about my cycle and I pull it up on my Instagram. And I would love to get to a point where I wouldn't feel a twinge of like a cringe moment if that was also posted to my Facebook, because it just is your period. It's nothing to be shameful about. And then
yeah,
I'm trying to study more about feminism, and I think there would be a really cool like analysis about why the uterus and the ovaries and the fallopian tubes and the vagina and vulva, all of that are so highly shamed. I think there could be a whole podcast with like a revolutionary feminist approach to it, which I'm just beginning to barely understand what that means. So just kind of a point on that. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That would be cool to look further into. So then another thing that I wanted to get into that I've seen you talking about is hormonal birth control specifically. And I saw one of the posts on your feed was about how it's like people are in two camps, and it seems like an absolute of you're not taking it, you shouldn't take it, you don't take it, say no to hormonal birth control at all costs. And then the other camp where it's like, yes, we're taking it. It's the only way to heal my body. Everybody should be on it and be comfortable like with birth control, all of those kind of things. So like, what are kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on that. I'm trying to make sure I like hit all of my points. I think it's really easy. I mean, the kind of like world, especially in the US that we live in right now, is very just much like black or white. So I'm not surprised that that's kind of the general theme of how women's health in terms of birth control is going, is that like it's very black or white. You're either like a lot of spiritual people or more like holistic people tend to be in the, not all of them, because there's a ton that are not, but a lot tend to be in a camp that are like no birth control ever, or it's like very, very bad. And then a lot of people who are in the more Western medical field tend to push a lot more for the hormonal birth control, either the pill or the IUD or the different forms of that. And I just think it can be, again, a very shaming experience for people who either want to be on the pill for different reasons or don't want to be on hormonal birth control for different reasons. And there's like so many reasons why you would choose one. And I personally am not on hormonal birth control. I don't want to be on hormonal birth control if I don't have to be ever again. And that for me was a personal choice that I made with a lot of different a lot of different things in my life added up for where I felt it was safe for me to make that choice. And I just think that that's a conversation that needs to have, that context needs to be there when we're having conversations about birth control, because doing a what's that called? Fertility awareness method, which is like where you're not on hormonal birth control and you're using different biological processes that happen in your body throughout your cycle to track your fertility to either avoid pregnancy or become pregnant, or like see when you're ovulating to hopefully become pregnant. That is an awesome approach to it. And it also takes a lot of time. You would hopefully want to pay someone to teach you how to do it, or like take a course on it or something. Like I don't recommend trying to do it totally on your own. So time, money to pay people to do it, energy to really like put into it, because it can be like not emotionally taxing, but you're kind of discovering a new part of your body that that we've been told to not think about. So all of these things just take a lot to do and to think about it. Like you got to have the resources and all this stuff. And if you're dealing with a menstrual health issue like endometriosis, like PCOS, things that can be helped in both ways. Like it can be great for people to be off the pill and be going to a specialist who can help you in that way. But if you don't have, again, the time, the money, and the resources, it can be super valuable for you to suppress your cycle for a little bit of time and be on a hormonal birth control. And I say the word suppress because that is what hormonal birth control is doing. Like some people say it's healing your cycle, but it's really just turning it off. And that's okay. That's not necessarily a bad thing. There are risks to being on hormonal birth control that is good for people to know. And I think that's a lot of people are talking about those risks, which is awesome because we need to be informed consumers of our healthcare. So understand the risks. And also, if you are in a time and a place where you don't have the time, money, or energy to be off, or you don't want to be off. Like I have so many friends who are such good examples of people who are on hormonal birth control for very different reasons. So one is a friend who was in grad school and she already had a baby. She was like married, so she was working full time. She had a baby, she was married, and she was going to grad school. And she was really struggling with her cycle. And she was like, I know that I should probably like figure this out and go to a specialist, but I don't have the time or the money right now to do that. And I can't really get through my months. I can't get through each cycle with this pain that my menstrual cycle is causing me. So she chose to go on the pill. And I was like, that's a perfect thing for you to do. You don't have the resources to go out there and do it at this time in your life. I have other friends who they tried to be off of birth control and they weren't very sexually active, but the anxiety for them of potentially getting pregnant was so big that they would freak out every single month, even if they maybe didn't have sex. But they decided for them that was not the right choice for the time they are in their life. So they went on a hormonal birth control for the peace of mind. So there's so many reasons why you can be on hormonal birth control that isn't like a shame. Like we shouldn't shame people for being on it. And the same is true for people who are on or who are not on hormonal birth control, who are using a method that works for them. So we usually get shamed like at the doctor's office or when talking to people who aren't aware of these methods. And the way that these methods are studied the data isn't collected in a way that really reflects what's true of people who are using like a fertility awareness method. And so we don't want the shame for either side. Like I'm choosing to be off because it just makes me feel better. I like the way, like I like understanding my cycle in that way. And again, I had the time, the money, and the resources to be able to be off of it. And also a thing that I think we don't talk about enough when we're talking about going off of hormonal birth control, which I'm supportive of if it makes sense for you in your life, is you've got to start wearing condoms if you're going to have sex in your fertile window and you don't want to be pregnant. Because a lot of people, I know condoms was really pushed like in the early and mid 2000s, and I'm sure it's still pushed now, but what's being pushed more is hormonal birth control to prevent pregnancy, where condoms, if you're going to go off of birth control, you have to start using condoms when you're in your fertile window. And a lot of people who are on it and then they go off of it, they're not used to wearing condoms as much. And so that's just like a very real piece of it as well, is like, that's why you really pay attention to your cycle to know when you're in that fertile window if you don't want to be pregnant. So there's so many ways. And the last point I want to make is I advocate for more healthcare resources for people who menstruate than just hormonal birth control. Because one, it doesn't work for everybody. Like there are people who just can't be on any of it for a multitude of reasons. And two, when someone comes to a doctor's office with a problem and they are ready to face it, or they can face the problem head on, and they are at a time where suppressing their cycle isn't going to work for them anymore or at all, we need something that's more than just like go on the pill to solve it. So that's kind of what my main point is that one, you got to find like, is this the right time and place for you to be off of hormonal birth control if that is a thing that you want to be off of? And that's great if it is. And then two, like we need more than just a hormonal pill that's not even really going to heal the cycle. It's just going to suppress it, which again, if that's where you need to be, that's fine. I think there was one more point I was trying to make, but I can't remember now. So yeah, that's my big spiel about it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely appreciate all of that, like the way that you encompass all of that and consider every point where people might be coming from, because for one, that's not my expertise. Like I'm a dietitian, I do nutrition. I want to help people heal their menstrual cycles, of course, which would be not involving hormonal birth control necessarily. Yeah. But like you said, it's not a place that everyone's at always. And I don't want to exclude them from the conversation of still doing these things to like nourish their bodies, support their bodies, and have an understanding of what's going on with the cycle. even if it's not a place that they're currently at, the information is still helpful, and it can be helpful for the future or whatever they have going on, you know? So yeah, I just like to hear that like summary from you. I don't have a lot to say on it besides that it's great and I appreciate it, but that was really good. Another thing that we have kind of had an overlapping. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add one thing where the last point I try to make is we have our cycles for a really long time, and you have so many opportunities depending on your healthcare situation and where you live to have different experiences with birth control. So if you are someone who is like, I really want to be off the pill, but there are a ton of different reasons why it's just not the right time for you, you will have your cycle till probably like, you know, till you hit menopause, which can be like 40s, 50s. So just you have so many opportunities and so much time to have different birth control options. That was my last point.
All right. That was good. I appreciate that as well. Because yeah, it's not always the best time to jump into it. Like you said, like coming off of the pill or any kind of birth control can be really daunting for many reasons. And it takes a lot of education and it takes a lot of patience, and it can be really emotionally taxing. So it's a lot of information to learn. I personally have never been on hormonal birth control, so I also lack that kind of understanding that I like to hear from other people so that I can understand what that position is. But at the same time, when I was learning a fertility awareness method from an educator, even not having the added portion of coming off of the pill, it was still a lot for me to take in and to understand and to implement in my life. So I can totally appreciate that portion as well.
It can be fun too.
Yes, it can for sure. I just had a lot of other things going on that made it, I guess, more negative than positive, but it can be fun. And it can, there's way more positives that have come out of it. I mean, even the negatives that I learned still have resulted in a positive result. So yeah, it's good to know. Good information. So another place where we've kind of overlapped recently in our conversations on social media is, well, your specific post was that an app can't tell if you're ovulating. So do you want to elaborate on kind of like that idea as well?
Yeah. I'm just kind of laughing at like how frank that post was. I'm a very like frank person. Yeah. So what I mean by an app can't tell you that you're ovulating is that your body might change when you ovulate every month. It could be like a few days. It could be a whole week, depending on different things that can happen throughout your cycle that would potentially change your ovulation day. And what an app typically does is it uses the data from your past cycles to predict when your next ovulation is going to be. And what the main thing I wanted people to get from the statement an app can't tell you when you're ovulating is that just don't use an app for birth control. Like that's kind of, I think, where a lot of the sentiment that we talked about earlier, where like, you know, someone who went off of birth control and then they started using an app or they started using a fertility awareness method, but really it was just an app. And then they got pregnant and they didn't want to be like, that wasn't their goal. That's kind of like where that came from, is that no algorithm is going to accurately predict when you're ovulating every single time. It could be right. But one, it's impossible to know exactly when you ovulated unless you're doing an ultrasound, which like no one would do. So what fertility awareness methods do, which we're not really going to get into in this podcast, but you figure out when your fertile window is and then when you've passed it. So like no fertility awareness method is telling you like you're ovulating on day 17. So if you're using an app just to track your cycle in general and just to like take notes on it, and it's an easy way for you to like pull up when your last period was, that's great. You should use an app for that. But if you're using an app specifically for birth control and it's telling you when you're going to be fertile or when you're going to ovulate, I just wouldn't trust that data if you're specifically trying not to get pregnant. And that's pretty much what I meant by that post, is it's just not for the specifics of when you're actually ovulating.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the same thing. I mean, kind of an overlap there was like, I feel like, and I probably just see these videos because it's like targeted at me, and then I engage with them because I always watch them out of like irritation, which is like so bad. I should just scroll past and let people have their feelings because what I say, like, it's not going to change. But yeah, is like people say exactly like, oh, like I was using an app or I was tracking my cycle or my ovulation, and like then they show a baby bump or they show their baby that has been a result of like trying to use it as birth control basically. And it's like, it just gets frustrating because I think it puts a bad light then on actually using like a fertility awareness method and understanding your ovulation window and having a true understanding, working with an educator, and like the efficacy of understanding when you're ovulating. And then if you don't want to become pregnant, choosing, like you said, use a condom, abstain, whatever the case may be for your situation, so that you don't become pregnant by using that, your body's like, oh my gosh, I can't think of the word, like the signs, the biological signs that your body gives you that tell you like you're potentially fertile right now. And yeah, like you said, it's not pinpointing like a day of ovulation the way like an app might randomly do.
Oh, of course. And that's why I really stress, if you're going to start using a fertility awareness method, to work with someone. Like, it is 100% worth the money to have a one-on-one group or a one-on-one session, like, you know, for over 3 months. It's not just like a one time, because especially if you are avoiding pregnancy, if that is the goal, I would work with someone. And or like a lot of people offer group calls.
It was just that the last time that I had you on for another episode, if people do want to hear about more about fertility awareness specifically, if this intrigues them, that is what we talked about. So if you scroll back, I think it was the end of last year, maybe October, November time, where I actually did a series on fertility awareness, and I had you on to talk about it, and a couple other women who specialize in fertility awareness methods to varying degrees to talk about kind of how they educate on that as well. So if anybody's listening. So another thing I know that you have going on as far as helping people understand their menstrual cycle and their menstrual cycle health is that you have a guide available on your website. I saw about assessing your menstrual cycle health. Can you kind of elaborate on like what people can learn from that and what this guide is that you have available?
Totally. It's kind of a guide. I think it's more of like just kind of an assessment to see where you're at, because I don't give a lot of resources if your cycle isn't following this. So on my Instagram, on my LinkedIn, or Linktree, not my LinkedIn, LOL, my Linktree, I think it says like assess your cycle. You just type in your email, and it's just a few different a few different points of like what a healthy menstrual cycle looks like. And I put that out there because I think we aren't taught that in our education system, like what a healthy cycle looks like. A lot of people are just like, they know that you just at least have to bleed like at least every 28 days, which is also not even true. But people know that like you got to bleed, or maybe you should like take a pregnancy test or go to the doctor if you haven't had sex. So my guide, assess your cycle. I guess we'll call it a guide for this purpose, because I don't know what else to call it right now. Okay. But I just go through how, like, the length of your cycle. So what a healthy menstrual cycle length is, which is between 24 and 35 days long. So like that's just the myth that you should have a 28-day cycle is false. It can be between 24 and 35 days long. If it's shorter than 24 days, then you'd want to see a medical professional or someone who like is a naturopath, or, you know, someone in the holistic realm too, but also a Western medicine doctor if that's your preference or just what your insurance covers. Or if it's longer than 35 days, that would be the sign that something is going, like, that you would want to get that checked out, because there might be something wrong with your cycle if that's the case. So the length of your actual period is another topic or another part of the guide and what is a healthy period. So the length of the days that you're actually bleeding should be between 3 and 7 days long. So if your period is shorter than 2 days, like if the amount of days you're bleeding is only 2 days long, or 1 day long, or if it's longer than 7 days. So if it lasts more than a week, like a full week, Sunday to Sunday, that's when you would want to see a medical professional for that as well. So it's pretty much just like this guide is just explaining, here's the guidelines of what a healthy cycle is. And if you are not fitting into these parameters, that would be your first clue, like, okay, something might be up with my cycle, especially, if you have one cycle once or twice a year, I think is the standard that doesn't fit between those guidelines. Then that's kind of normal to have one like wonky cycle. Like you have a really stressful month or something and your cycle just kind of like goes a little funky. That's okay. But if it's kind of happening more than once, then that's when you want to see someone. So ovulation, that's your fertile window. That's when you can get pregnant. There's also a lot more to ovulation, and we talked about that in the other episode as well. But ovulation typically should occur around the middle of your cycle. Again, if it's occurring right after your period or right before your period, that would be a sign that something is going up with your cycle, and you'd want to get that checked out. And then your luteal phase length, so that's right after you ovulate is when you enter your luteal phase. And it's kind of hard to detect these things like ovulation and luteal phase when you're not like tracking your cycle using a fertility awareness method. And you can't really track it at all if you're using hormonal birth control, because hormonal birth control will alter these two things. Excuse me. But your luteal phase wants to be between 9 and 18 days long. If it's shorter than 9 days, that would be a sign. I keep saying this again. You'd want to go talk to your doctor. I don't want to give like full reasons why, just because one, at the top of my head, I can't think of it right now. And two, that I don't want to like fear monger, like that you have something terribly wrong with you, and it could be stress. It could be something else. So there's a ton of reasons why your cycle might go a little wonky. And it just, if it's not following these, that's when you see a professional about it. If it's longer than 18 days, that's when you would take a pregnancy test, or you probably just didn't ovulate and you're not even in your luteal phase. So if it's longer than 18 days and you did ovulate, take a pregnancy test. If it's longer than 18 days and you don't think you ovulated, or you don't know, or you didn't have sex where it would be impossible for you to be pregnant, that's where you probably aren't even in your luteal phase and you're just stuck in your follicular phase and your body is struggling to ovulate. And then cervical mucus is the second to last point. So that's that like discharge in your underwear that you might see. It's like, can be sometimes like gooey, like an egg yolk. It can be like lotiony. It can be like kind of like sticky or pasty, all of these different kinds. You just want to see changes in those. And we also talked about this way more in the other episode as well. So I won't go into too much detail, but if you're not on hormonal birth control, you should be seeing changes in your cervical mucus, because your cervix is something that changes throughout, or the cervical mucus is something that changes throughout your cycle. And it tells you kind of where you're at in your fertility, in your fertile window, or if you're not in your fertile window. And then my last point is just how you should feel, which is minimal to no pain. So our society has just totally normalized pain. Like we say, oh, if you stay home from school with cramps, that's just part of being a woman. That's just part of being a menstruator. Or like you go on crazy mood swings. I don't really want to use the word crazy, but it just came out right there. So you go on these huge mood swings that you feel like you can't really live the life that you want to live. Or, your breasts are so tender that you're wearing like 3 sports bras just to kind of like go on a walk. All of these things where if your life is being altered, where you feel like you can't really live your day-to-day normal life, that's where you would want to also see a medical professional or a holistic professional, things like that, because your cycle isn't supposed to ruin your life or even change your life that drastically. But unfortunately, that's kind of been what we've been taught. So just trying to change the narrative. And again, hopefully in the future, we'll have more than just going on the birth control pill, which actually I do have a story about that. But like how I was actually offered something that was different than the birth control pill for something that was really nice. So that's my cycle guide. Again, I don't know if guide is the right word, but that's a good word for now.
Okay. Well, that works. And people can find that on your website. You said directly on your social media page, right? The links?
Yes. I think that's the only way you can get to it. It's like a landing page for people who know what that means.
Okay. Yes. I will have her social media, like direct link to her Instagram page listed in the notes as well. So you can just click the link and it'll take you to her page and see everything that she has going on. So for anybody that wants to see that. Okay. That's really helpful. Did you want to tell your story on the other birth control thing you were offered, or?
Yes, I'll do it quick. I should have mentioned this, but I kind of forgot about it till right now. So about a year ago, January 2022, when I ovulated that month, I had what was called a corpus luteum hemorrhagicum. I'm not really sure. What it means is when you ovulate, you're in the ovary, it creates a sac that becomes the corpus luteum. And then that produces the progesterone throughout the rest of your cycle. And what happened with me is when I ovulated that month, it just went a little too wild and my corpus luteum started hemorrhaging, which sounds extremely scary, but I was told it was kind of normal. And also they were like, it's not like you're hemorrhaging, like where you're going to die. Like it'll probably just like heal itself. So it was a super painful ovulation. It was like, I was also in a very, very stressful time in my life, and my cycle kind of like wasn't very fun for about a year after that, because every time I ovulated, the theory is that I had scar tissue left over from that incident, and the scar tissue was being just kind of like irritated every time. So I just felt this like dull, achy pain, kind of like if you have a bruise or a cut and you keep pressing on it, but like inside my ovary every time I ovulated. And ovulation is supposed to be like the fun, sexy part of your cycle. Right. And I would just be annoyed every single time.
Oh God.
Yeah, and I got an ultrasound done. I think like we were talking, like I also got a what's it called? Like
vaginal ultrasound.
Yes, vaginal ultrasound. I thought it was called something else, but yeah, just a vaginal ultrasound. It's a very like unique experience.
Yes.
And, you know, like I got things checked out to where like, okay, like there was not something more seriously wrong. And that's where my doctor was like, it's probably just scar tissue. So this was happening again, like for a year. And every time I was stressed, it was kind of a stressful year for me. It just would like flare up is what I'm trying to say. So I went back to the doctor like a month ago or so. And I was like, okay, like what's going on? Like, I know that it's stress induced as well, but it also happens when I'm not very stressed, but like life is just a stressful event. So how can I get this how can I help this? Like, I want this to go away. And I was kind of like preparing myself for her to be like, well, the only thing we can do is put you on the pill to stop ovulation since it is only occurring during your ovulation. But I was super impressed. She, was like, really validated me and was like, I totally understand that you think it's coming from stress. That's so real. Like, she was really validating that it was coming as well from stress. But not in a way where like, it's just in your head, but in a way that was like, this makes sense and I get it and it's real. And then the other thing that she said is she was like, you're probably just like very tense as well. And because I was also having some like low libido where I was just like, this isn't fun to have like 0 to no libido since this event happened. And she was like, well, all these things are probably just occurring at the same time. So you're probably very tense. And just her saying that made me feel a lot better. And then she offered that I go to pelvic floor therapy. So I was offered a different treatment than just birth control, which made me feel amazing and made me trust this doctor more because I told her, like, I don't want to go on birth control, whatever. And the pelvic floor therapy was also great just to kind of like loosen me up, like made me feel seen, and I could talk to the pelvic floor therapist about things that were going on. And knock on wood, but this cycle has been a lot better than my previous cycles. So just, advocate for yourself. I know it's extremely hard, especially with other things going on like class and racism and things when you're sitting at the doctor's office. But I was really adamant. Like, I don't want to go on birth control. And she was super helpful, and also change doctors. Like, if they're not listening to you, that is so hard to do. I know. Like, I just go to whatever doctor is available on the day I'm available. But if you can, change doctors. So I hope I made that short enough. Sorry.
No, that was great. Yeah, no, it's okay. I appreciate it. And pelvic floor physical therapy is incredible. I personally have never had the opportunity to do it, but both my sisters have gone, and I interviewed actually their pelvic floor physical therapist like a month or two ago as well. And hearing from her was, they just do great work. And again, it can vary from person to person. So like you said, with the doctors, you have to find someone that's the right fit for you, but it sounds like it can be extremely beneficial for a lot of menstrual cycle related issues that people experience. So that's great. And all right, so the last thing that I kind of want to cover then before we wrap up this episode, I know it's been a little bit long, but it's been great talking through all of these different things, is if you can explain the different phases of the menstrual cycle. I know a lot of people talk about it, but I think it's good to hear from different perspectives and different people who can like have an education background, especially. And we've already mentioned kind of some of the phases, but maybe people don't understand or have a concept of what that means. So can you give your best spiel on the different phases of your menstrual cycle?
Yeah, for sure. So there are 4 phases to the menstrual cycle. I should say there are 4 phases to the menstrual cycle when you break it down holistically. So in medical, like in the Western medical sense, they usually only break the cycle down into 2 phases, but it's now a trend, and I appreciate the trend that we're breaking it down holistically. And I just want to say that because if you are like reading like peer-reviewed papers about the cycle, you'll be very confused. And then you'll be like, oh wait, it's just broken down into 2. Or your doctor like might not understand what you're saying when you're like my follicular phase or my menstrual phase, whatever.
Right.
So just wanted to give that context because it can be kind of confusing if you're taking a deeper dive into it. So the 4 phases just follow along the path of your cycle. So we start at the menstrual phase, which is the day that you start bleeding. That's your menstrual phase. It's your period. And during this phase, I'm sure you hear, if like you're listening to this podcast, you probably are like also interested and follow other things about the cycle. So that's the phase typically where you might feel lower energy. Sometimes I actually feel a bit higher energy on the first day of my period because I'm like excited that it's here and I get to start over again. It's also the phase where all of your hormones are at the lowest concentration. So you're just kind of bleeding everything out, and you can like, again, you might feel, I'm reading like a little chart I made as well. My eyes are kind of darting across the screen, but it's likely to feel lower energy, maybe a little introverted, or for me, I typically like to be around other people who menstruate as well. Not that like they're on their menstrual cycle, but just other women and other people who menstruate is kind of how I like to spend my energy if I can at that time. Not all the time is I'm able to do that, but. And then to support yourself during this phase, it can be helpful to ask for help if you really struggle in this part of your cycle, like if you have bad cramps, like endometriosis, or just like other things that are going a little bit funky in your cycle and you don't feel like at your best. It's really helpful if you can make a list of what is helpful and what is not helpful during this time, and maybe create a support plan for you and your own community. Like maybe that's your partner, your friends, your parents, to just really give yourself that extra love, because you need to take care of your cycle, and that's okay to do. We don't have to like power through everything if we don't have to. Obviously, there are times in our life where we do have to power through things and it's not as fun. So then moving on, after you finish your period, you enter your follicular phase. And this is the second phase of your cycle. And it's when your hormones start rising. So your hormones are kind of all rising until ovulation, which is the next phase. But in the follicular phase, you might notice that your energy starts rising as well. It's like your follicular phase lasts from the start of your follicular phase to when you ovulate, or your ovulation phase. It's kind of hard to tell if you're not reading your cycle through like the fertility awareness method, but pretty much that's how it goes. So you might feel more energized, you might feel more eager to socialize and like see people and go out. And it can be helpful to increase the intensity of your workouts and eat fresher foods. Like I think Alyssa VT talks about drinking or like eating more fermented foods during this time. Things that your digestive system can handle really easily that are more fresh versus in your menstrual phase and in your luteal phase, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's a little bit more helpful if you are really trying to like dive into these phases to eat more warm cooked foods. So like soups in your menstrual phase and like stews and things like that. I always like to eat curry when I'm on my period from this like really good Thai restaurant near my house. I know I just kind of like jumped back and forth between those two, but then third comes your ovulatory phase. This is in the middle of your cycle. This is when a bunch of your hormones, not all of them, but a bunch of them are peaking, and you might feel like the most energetic, the most eager to socialize. You might feel like super horny, or like you have a really high libido and you really want to like just get out into the world and experience life in that way, like very externally. This is also when you're fertile and you can get pregnant. You usually have like a fertile window of like 6-ish days. Again, work with someone if you're looking to understand your cycle more in that way. And it can be helpful to do intense workouts, if you're like working on a workout plan, like to do your max weights at that time is when your body can be like, it's really supportive. Your body would like really support that during that time versus other phases of your cycle. Eat fresher foods again and really see community, like really go out and hang out with your friends and talk to people. It's just, you might just feel more motivated to do that. And then after you ovulate comes your luteal phase, which is what I talked about before. So your luteal phase happens right after you ovulate, and it lasts right until your next period. This is when your progesterone is the dominant hormone. So all other hormones have pretty much kind of like gone down, and now progesterone is the star of the show. So like I said before, a healthy luteal phase lasts between 9 and 18 days, and you will most likely see like no cervical mucus or very dry cervical mucus. Again, that's like discharge in your underwear. It's typical to feel an energy decline as your period gets closer. You might like feel a slight change in mood. I know I'm entering my luteal phase when I start getting really irritated at small things that my boyfriend does. Like I'll like be like, why would he do that? And then I'll be like, I was not annoyed about this last week. I'm probably in my luteal phase if I'm like really annoyed about this. Like a very small thing. So yeah, like your energy can kind of start to maybe see a decline. You might feel more introverted, not as eager to go out, maybe more eager to rest, like watch a movie, have a night in. If your hormones are struggling, if you are struggling with your cycle, this would be the phase that you would get PMS, that premenstrual syndrome, where you would feel like, not just irritation or maybe like irritation all day long and it's really bad and things like that. So it's helpful to decrease the intensity of your workouts, to eat slower cooked foods, to honor your desire to rest in whatever way that's possible. I mean, if you can like take a nap during the day, if you can cancel plans, if you can get childcare, if you can't do those things, like take a longer extended shower, sleep in 5 extra minutes. So that was a lot. To sum it up, you can think of the 4 phases as like a bell curve. So for people watching on YouTube, you would start in your menstrual phase. This is where your hormones are like at the lowest. You go up your follicular phase, the hormones are rising. at the peak of the bell curve is when you're ovulating. Most hormones are peaking here. And then you go back down and your hormones are declining again all the way until you get your period. So if you're like very confused about this, just think of a bell curve and go from there. It's a lot. It's a lot. I totally understand if it's a lot.
Yes, it can be very confusing. But I appreciate your breakdown and kind of your take on describing the different phases and what's going on. Because like I said, I think it's good to hear it multiple times and hear it from different people just so people can really grasp like the concept, especially if it's their first time or like they're beginners in understanding it. So I think that's probably it for today's episode. Do you have anything that you want to promote or share with people that you have going on before we close off?
Yes, depending on when this episode comes out, I'm just pulling up my calendar. I am hosting a youth period class. It's called the Period Talk. I'm hosting this with my friend who is the owner of a company that sells period party kits. So people, when they get their first period, they can throw a little party for it if they are into that. And her company is called Bloody Awesome. We're hosting an educational event. It's via Zoom, so anyone in the country can come. And our class is on March 5th. I'm going to have it up in my link tree on Instagram and on my website. I'm going to have it up by the time this comes out. So if this comes out before March 5th, totally, we're going to have a lot more as well. So this is a class that youth ages 8 to 12 can come to along with their parents. Again, it's online. I think it's only 60 minutes as just a intro to your period. Because I know a lot of youth, especially if you're in different parts of the country, aren't getting this in school. So this is a great opportunity if you know someone who's in that age range, or if you're a parent and just want to know more and kind of learn how to talk about it. And we're going to do more of these if you can't make it to this one, and have other courses that we're building out as well. So stay tuned for that.
Okay, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, the younger that we can have people understanding how this functions, the closer to their first period that they can know the information, I think the better off they can be for like lifelong menstrual cycle health. So very important. And thank you.
Totally. If someone's first period doesn't have to be like mine, I will, let's do it.
Yeah. For sure. Okay, so that'll be it for today. Thank you again to Carolyn for coming on. Like I said, everything, my social pages, her social pages, linked in the show notes. Be sure to share this information with friends, people who you think might benefit from the conversation we've had today, or to open up the conversation with people you know. And yeah, I hope that this episode has helped you to make better bites. Have a great week.
Thank you.